What's going on, guys? It's Red Bull Tanker, and welcome back to Axis and Allies Europe 1951. This is turn 10. Whoops, 1 second. Yeah. Alright. It is now November 1951. It is the end of fall. We are getting close to the winter months. And just to recap, for the winter months, you'll see this symbol, and what that means is that sea zones 10, 11, 3, and 4 become frozen, and what that means is that no ships may enter or leave. So unfortunately, those ships are going to be trapped until March of 1952 now. So that might not be good for the NATO forces, but we shall press on. Alright, the random event, this time it went for the Russians. I guess in retaliation for Moscow being nuked, the Soviets were able to get a nuclear weapon into France and nuked Paris. So Paris took a hit. A 4 was rolled, but because there are no air units in Paris, NATO lost 2 mech infantry, and then the airbase was max damaged. And as always, because of the nuke, Paris cannot be built on, cannot be entered or left. So this turn really, that really hurt NATO this turn. Alright, the initiative. Alright, the initiative once again was another comedy of errors this time. So on the first roll, every single dice came up 3s. Then on the second roll, the Soviets rolled a 5, and then the US and NATO both rolled 2s. And then on the third roll, the US rolled a 6 and NATO rolled a 5. So the turn order went, once again, the Soviets, the United States, and then NATO rounded out the turn. Alright, the Soviets. Alright, the Soviets had 91 to spend. They put a lot in repairing off the damages, so they repaired the damages to the factory in Moscow, the factory in Istanbul, and the factory in the Caucasus. They bought 2 tanks for Hungary, Katusha, and 2 tanks for Warsaw. Once again, 3 infantry in Smolensk, 3 infantry in Kiev. They put a mech and a mech and a tank here in the Caucasus. And then 2 infantry in Romania. Combat. Alright, this is where the Soviets kind of got at the Allies pretty good. So for the first combat, once again, everything keeps seesaw. They took their forces in Austria and attacked the Allied forces here in Turin again, and the casualties ended up being NATO lost a self-propelled gun and 3 tanks, and I guess NATO did not think that the Soviets would launch another attack and only scored 1 hit on a Soviet infantry. Next, the Soviets took 2 airborne units out of Istanbul and made a spectacular landing here in Marseille. So 2 airborne initially jumped onto Marseille and it was open, so they took that pretty easily. And then finally, the Soviets marshaled up their forces from Kars and their infantry in Syria and attacked Jordan. Casualties for that battle were the remaining tank of the 4th Armored Division was destroyed, and the Soviets lost 1 infantry from Syria. Non-combat, the Soviets mainly moved their air forces back here, consolidated here in Hungary and West Poland. They centralized a lot of their army here in West Poland. They also moved these forces down from the Caucasus to back up the Soviet forces here in Jordan. And then at the end of the turn, after deployments, the Soviets collected 98 IPC. All right, over to the Americans. All right, the Americans, the U.S. had 72 to spend. They ended up buying 3 infantry, which were all flagged under the 41st Infantry Division. They bought 2 mech, flagged as the 86th Infantry Division. 1 self-propelled gun, and then 2 tanks flagged under the 9th Armored Division. 2 AAA guns, and then 2 transports. Combat. Alright, seeing that we were basically, the Allies were in trouble, the United States sort of abandoned their Middle East drive. So starting off, the 97th and 10th Armored Divisions from Tunisia boarded their transports, and with a cruiser came up here and landed in Marseille to counterattack the 2 airborne. The offshore bombardment did score a hit, and then they were able to take out the other airborne at a loss of 1 infantry to the 97th. And then the U.S. gathered its entire force from Cairo, loaded it up on transports, brought it all here with all their air force, and attempted an attack. Did a landing op. If I can get it just right. Hold on one second. Let me adjust a couple things. And did an amphibious assault against the Soviet forces in Turnin. Casualties for that: the Soviets lost 3 mech infantry, 1 artillery, and 4 tanks. The U.S. lost the 2 infantry of the 104th Division, the 2 mechanized infantry from the 30th Infantry Division, 1 tank from the 11th Armored Division, so only 1 tank remains, and then 2 fighters were also taken as casualties. All right. Non-combat. So the U.S. moved their air forces back. They put their planes back on the carriers, moved their bombers into Rome. They sea and airlifted the 36th Infantry Division, the 28th Infantry Division, and the 7th Armor to Cairo to at least try and stall out the Soviets there. I did make a mistake, and so 1 infantry did have to get left on the build queue, which got, like I said, got integrated into the 41st infantry. Actually, that's supposed to be a green under there, because, yeah, that's supposed to be a green. That's supposed to be 4 infantry right there. I'll have to fix that. But so then 1 regiment of the 92nd with a self-propelled gun came off the build queue on the transport, landed here in Tunisia. And then I think that was pretty much it for the U.S. non-combats. Yeah, and so then at the end of the turn, the U.S. collected 67 IPC. NATO. All right, so NATO initially started with 84 IPC, but then they lost 10. Due to the atom bombing of Paris, and also lost 6. Came down 6 because of Paris. They ended up instead. So since they couldn't build in Paris, they bought 2 mech and a tank for Rome. They bought 2 mech and 2 tanks here in Holland. They put a fighter in Belgium. And then put 3 infantry in London, and then saved 1 IPC. Combat. All right. The NATO launched 3 combats this turn. First, they took all their forces from Stettin, came down here to Breslau to fight the Soviet army that had taken out the Army of the Rhine here in Breslau. Total casualties for that: the Soviets lost 1 infantry and 8 tanks. NATO lost 4 infantry, 2 airborne, and a mech. Next, a single mech from Rome blitzed up here into Austria and secured that. And then finally, for the, I think this is really the first time in the game, the NATO forces. I suppose I didn't need to do that, but NATO gathered the 1 infantry from West Germany and the 1 infantry from Oslo, put it on, I guess, 1 per transport because I moved 2 up there. Put them on transports, and then with the tank and self-propelled gun blitzing, NATO took back Narvik and went into Murmansk. So now NATO forces are in the Rodina. NATO forces have pierced into the heart of the or not really pierced into the heart, but have captured a territory within the Soviet Union, which is not going to be looking good for the Soviets. And then on the non-combat, NATO just kind of shifted their forces around. The 2 fighters from Rome that came to this battle went to Berlin. They moved their bombers and their air transport back to Reims. And that was pretty much it. And so then at the end of the turn, NATO collected 77 IPC. Alright, well, that is going to be it for turn 10. And we will see you guys next time for turn 11. So until then, guys, as always, take care.